The conflict in Gaza is one of the most documented, debated, and devastating on the planet. Yet, amidst the overwhelming coverage of politics, historical grievances, and human suffering, there exists a subterranean layer of economic drivers, a complex web of financial incentives, profiteering, and strategic interests that often escape the prime-time headlines. To speak of the money behind the war is not to reduce a profound human tragedy to mere currency, but to expose how capital flows can perpetuate cycles of violence, making peace economically inconvenient for powerful actors. This is an exploration of the hidden economy of a prolonged conflict, the immediate war economy, a recurring boom war. Tragically, is a business. In the context of Gaza, this manifests in several direct and cyclical ways. First, and most blatantly, is the arms industry. Every escalation necessitates replenishment. Israeli strikes deplete munitions. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fire rockets often domestically produced or smuggled, which itself is a multi-million-dollar clandestine trade. The result is a guaranteed multi-billion-dollar order book for defense contractors. Following major conflicts, the Israeli military submits requests for billions to restock everything from precision-guided missiles to Iron Dome interceptors. Major American companies like Lockheed, Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing, along with Israeli giants like Elbit Systems and Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, are direct beneficiaries. This isn't a shadowy conspiracy. It's Gonkai, the corporate reporting showing stock bumps during periods of tension. For these entities, conflict validates their product's necessity and drives future R&D budgets. In the United States, congressional approval of military aid to Israel over $3 billion annually, largely mandated to be spent on U.S. goods, functions as a steady, recession-proof subsidy to the defense industrial base across dozens of states, creating jobs and political constituencies that actively lobby for its continuance. Second, the reconstruction cycle. Gaza is arguably the world's worst recurring construction site. After each bombardment, billions in international aid pledges flow in for reconstruction. This money creates a fraught and convoluted economy. It must be coordinated between donor countries like Qatar, the EU and Arab nations, the Palestinian Authority, UN agencies, Israel, which controls the entry of materials. Citing security concerns over dual-use items like concrete that could be diverted for tunnels, and de facto authorities in Gaza like Hamas, this process is riddled with inefficiency, corruption, and political maneuvering. Construction companies, material suppliers, and intermediaries positioned within this Byzantine system can profit immensely. Hamas has been documented to levy taxes on materials entering the Strip, controlling labor and projects, thereby consolidating both economic power and political legitimacy through patronage. For some, a destroyed Gaza is more valuable economically than a stable one. It represents a future contract, a flow of aid dollars to be managed and skimmed. The hidden strategic assets, gas, trade, and land beyond the immediate war economy lie broader strategic economic interests that shape the political landscape, making the status quo contained, intermittently erupting Gaza preferable to certain regional powers over risky geopolitical shifts. The Eastern Mediterranean natural gas fields are a paramount factor. Israel's Leviathan and Tamar fields, and the potential Gaza marine field off the coast of Gaza sit in a contested maritime zone. A fully sovereign, powerful Palestinian entity in Gaza, one led by Hamas, or influenced by Iran, would complicate claims and pipeline routes. Israel has pursued energy independence and become a regional exporter, with deals to Jordan, Egypt, and potentially Europe. The instability in Gaza and the broader Palestinian issue is a variable in energy negotiations and security calculations. A lasting peace would redefine borders and economic zones, disrupting current plans. For Egypt and Jordan, Stable relations with Israel for gas and security often take precedence over aggressively pushing for Palestinian sovereignty, which they fear could bring instability to their own borders. Control of trade and movement is itself an economic instrument. Israel's near-total control over Gaza's land, sea, and airspace since 2007, alongside Egypt's control of the Rafah crossing, has created a captive economy. The dualio's restrictions on imports have stifled normal economic development, ensuring Gaza remains dependent. This dependency creates a market for smuggling tunnels, which were historically a multi-million-dollar lifeline and industry in Rafah, while Egypt has cracked down severely. The tunnel economy exemplified how siege and war breed illicit profit centers for those who control the underground gates. Furthermore, the Palestinian labor force is a crucial asset. Tens of thousands of Gazans once worked in Israel, providing cheap, vital labor for construction and agriculture. Since the October 7th attack, that has ceased. But the dynamic remains. A fragile economy next door provides a controllable, seasonal labor pool. But its instability is seen as a security threat for hardline elements within the Israeli political sphere, particularly the settler movement. The conflict with Gaza serves to distract and consolidate, while Gaza itself is not a site for settlement. The perpetual emergency and focus on security provide political cover for the relentless and economically motivated expansion of settlements in the West Bank. The value of this land, strategic, religious, and resource riches, astronomical. The consolidation of control over the entirety of historic Palestine is, for some, a long-term economic and ideological project. A peaceful resolution with Gaza as part of a cohesive Palestinian state would directly threaten that project. Thus, a divided Palestinian leadership with a hostile Hamas-run Gaza separate from the weaker Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is a geopolitical asset for those opposed to a two-state solution. The regional axis of resistance economy on the other side. The conflict is also financially managed by Iran and its proxy network. For Iran, funding Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad is a relatively low-cost, high-yield strategic investment. It pins down a major regional rival, Israel, projects power, and garners legitimacy across the Arab street. The tens of millions funneled through illicit financial networks, cryptocurrencies, and trade-based money laundering are a modest line item in Iran's defense budget for the returns it generates in geopolitical leverage. This external funding allows Hamas to run its governance structure in Gaza, paying civil servants, providing some services, and fund its military wing, creating a parallel economy dependent on conflict and resistance as its raison d'etre. Peace would sever this vital lifeline of purpose and funding. The nobody talks about. Silencers. Why is this economic underside not central to the discourse? Several forces actively suppress it. The primacy of the security narrative. Discussions immediately default to existential security threats, historical rights, and terrorism. To introduce profit motives is seen as cynical, reductive, or even anti-Semitic when discussing Israel, or as excusing terrorism when discussing Hamas. The moral and historical framings are so powerful they eclipse material ones. Beneficiaries in the shadows, those who profit: arms dealers, smugglers, corrupt intermediaries, politicians whose districts house defense plants have no interest in publicity. Their influence is exercised through lobbying, campaign finance, and quiet policy shaping, not公开的debate. The humanitarian overwhelm. The sheer scale of human suffering, the images of children in rubble, rightfully dominates coverage. Analyzing the financial architecture feels cold and detached in the face of immediate tragedy. The complexity. It's easier to tell a story of good versus evil, ancient hatreds, or security versus terror than to untangle a global web of defense contracts, gas royalties, aid agency procurement, and illicit tunneling profits. The human cost. the only unprofitable element, then the final calculation. The only entity that truly bears the cost is the people of Gaza and, to a different degree, the civilians of Israel living under rocket fire. For them, the war economy is catastrophic. It destroys their homes, kills their families, shatters their futures, and traps them in a human cage where the only growth industries are despair, radicalization, and the digging of graves or tunnels. Their suffering is the externality. Aid as a stabilizer of crisis, even the international humanitarian response. A moral necessity has become structurally woven into this economy of deadlock. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency UNRWA is a multi-billion-dollar operation employing thousands in Gaza. It provides education, healthcare, and food, a critical lifeline. However, critics argue that by managing the humanitarian consequences of the blockade and conflict, the international community effectively subsidizes the status quo. It alleviates the immediate suffering that might otherwise force a political reckoning upon either the Israeli government facing a full-scale collapse or Hamas facing a revolting population. Donor countries, while criticizing the violence, fund the repair of infrastructure they know may be bombed again in the next cycle. This creates a bizarre, tragic form of predictability, destruction, followed by donor conferences, followed by reconstruction contracts, followed by simmering tension, followed by destruction. The aid workers are heroes, but the aid system can become an unwilling participant in a stabilizing loop of crisis management, diverting energy from the politically harder task of crisis resolution. The ultimate cost-benefit analysis: who gains? So, let's do a final grim tally. Gains: defense contractors, surveillance tech startups, politicians whose power is tied to fear and nationalism, militant groups whose legitimacy is tied to resistance, smugglers and tunnel builders, reconstruction conglomerates, and certain regional powers who use the conflict to advance their own influence. Losses: the civilian population of Gaza, their lives, their homes, their future. The Israeli civilians living under rocket fire and trauma. The moral capital of nations. The stability of the Middle East. The very idea of a shared future. The money tells the story of a conflict that has been institutionalized. It's no longer a bug in the system. For too many powerful actors, it is a feature. The flow of capital from crypto donations to defense contracts, from aid funds to reconstruction tenders, creates a powerful inertia. It builds careers, fills quarterly reports, wins elections, and funds militias. Peace would be a disruptive, unprofitable shock to this established system. It would require not just political agreement, but dismantling vast, entrenched economic interests that have grown like vines around the foundations of war. The haunting question then becomes: is the conflict in Gaza driven primarily by an unsolvable, ancient hatred? Or is it perpetuated by a very modern, very calculable matrix of financial and political incentives that make mowing the grass more profitable than planting a new field? The evidence of the money suggests the latter. The rockets and the raids are the terrifying visible explosions, but they are ignited by a slower burning fuse made of cash, contracts, and cold calculation. This is the story nobody wants to tell, because it implicates not just one side, but a global network of profit and power. If this investigation has shifted your perspective, then your voice matters. Share this analysis. Break the silence around the money. Discuss it. Demand that your representatives follow the financial trails as vigorously as the political ones. The first step to changing a system is to see it in full, ugly detail. You've now seen it. What will you do with this truth? Like, share, subscribe, not for the algorithm, but for the awakening. The greatest weapon against a hidden economy is a public that refuses to look away.